Canadian border agents watched something they'd never seen before. Entire lanes sitting empty during peak travel hours. The kind of silence that doesn't happen unless something deeper has broken. Bloomberg reported that arrivals didn't just fall, they cratered, with a 35% collapse hitting so fast that regional governments started rewriting their budgets before the week was over. What should have been a routine flow of travelers from America's closest ally had turned into a vanishing act, and by the time U.S. agencies figured out the drop wasn't a glitch, hotels, restaurants, and airports from Buffalo to Bellingham were already counting losses. The question stopped being why the numbers were falling. It became why America's allies were pulling back at the exact same moment, and what that signaled about the country they were suddenly avoiding. In Washington state, business owners near the Peace Arch crossing told the Wall Street Journal that weekend revenue had fallen by double digits, wiping out expectations for the busiest travel months of the year. In Montana's Flathead County records showed a 39% collapse in international tourism spending, a blow that left hotel operators shelving renovation plans and shifting staff to reduce schedules. The shock wasn't limited to isolated pockets. It was rippling across every major cross-border corridor with a coherence that suggested something larger than economics. National data confirmed that this was not a temporary downturn but a structural shift. The U.S. Travel Association projected foreign visitor spending would drop about 7% for the year, and the World Travel and Tourism Council reported that the United States had become the only major global destination experiencing a contraction in inbound spending. Revenues had fallen from $181 billion to just under $169 billion, a reversal that contrasted sharply with tourism booms in Spain, France, Italy, and the UK. Reuters emphasized that Europe was benefiting from record-high travel demand while the United States was slipping backward, despite similar macroeconomic conditions. The administration attributed the slump to the strong dollar, but that explanation faltered under broader scrutiny. The Financial Times noted that European airfares were elevated as well, and the yen had made Japan expensive for many travelers. Yet both regions saw unprecedented surges in arrivals. The divergence raised a different hypothesis, that political climate and administrative friction were reshaping travel preferences in ways U.S. policymakers had underestimated. Interviews collected by the New York Times documented frustration among prospective travelers, describing the United States as increasingly unpredictable and unnecessarily difficult to enter. The introduction of the visa integrity fee intensified that sentiment. Implemented in April, the $250 surcharge pushed the cost of a U.S. visitor visa above $440 for applicants from China, India, the Philippines, Indonesia, and several African nations. Bloomberg interviewed travel executives who warned that the change would suppress long-haul demand just as global travel was normalizing. For many families, the additional cost transformed a U.S. vacation from aspirational to impractical, especially when alternative destinations offered simpler entry procedures and more predictable policies. Asia's travel patterns sharpened the contrast. The Japan National Tourism Organization reported record inbound tourism as a weak yen drew millions of visitors, but Japanese travel to the United States moved in the opposite direction. Bloomberg cited double-digit declines in United States-bound bookings as Japanese travelers gravitated towards Seoul, Singapore, Taipei, and Dubai, destinations with smoother entry processes and fewer political complications. In Seoul, airline executives told the Financial Times that corporate clients were shifting conference locations to regional hubs due to inconsistent United States border procedures and heightened visa scrutiny. China's numbers revealed a similar fragility. As airlines restored long-haul routes, arrivals from China to the United States rose modestly, but Reuters noted the volumes remained far below pre-pandemic levels and were highly sensitive to diplomatic tensions. Meanwhile, Chinese platforms reported surging demand for Thailand, Japan, and South Korea, signaling that new regional habits were forming faster than United States routes could recover. The gaps were visible even to international hotel groups, which told the Wall Street Journal they were reassigning marketing budgets away from the United States and toward destinations demonstrating stronger, clearer demand. Corporate travel underscored the same pattern. The Global Business Travel Association reported a 9% drop in United States-bound business trips in April, with Germany, India, South Korea, and Singapore leading the decline. Interviews conducted by the Wall Street Journal with senior executives confirmed that visa uncertainty, high costs, and inconsistent entry experiences were pushing multinational firms to redirect annual gatherings towards Seoul, Singapore, Tokyo, and Dubai. These moves had ripple effects on airline revenue, hotel bookings, and convention center utilization, micro-level losses that compounded into macro-level declines. Even the education sector, historically among America's strongest magnets, showed signs of strain. Counselors interviewed by the New York Times noted rising interest in Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Singapore among families concerned about United States visa costs and processing times. While the United States remained the top destination for international students, the early warning signs were significant because international students support housing markets, retail ecosystems, and transportation networks across hundreds of American communities. Germany's mobility trends added another layer. Data from the Federal Statistics Office showed German immigration to the United States falling almost 18% to around 17,100 people, while American migration to Germany rose above 19,000, the highest since 2019. German tourism authorities reported a decline of more than 3% in United States-bound travel between January and August, with July's drop exceeding 10%. German media outlets linked the downturn to updated travel advisories warning that valid stay approval no longer guaranteed admission, a message that resonated across online forums and travel planning networks. The dynamic shifted sharply when Canada, historically America's most dependable ally, moved from passive discomfort to open resistance. Ontario launched a public campaign criticizing United States tariff proposals, and when President Trump halted trade discussions and threatened additional measures, Canadian sentiment hardened immediately. Angus Reid polling found that 70% of Canadians were reconsidering winter travel to the United States, citing border friction, political rhetoric, and a growing perception that the United States felt less welcoming. CBC News featured interviews with longtime Florida snowbirds who were canceling plans after new fingerprinting and long-stay registration requirements took effect. Some sold properties they had owned for decades. Others redirected their winters toward Mexico, Portugal, or the Caribbean. Their reasoning was unequivocal. Crossing the United States border no longer felt simple or stable. European business circles were making parallel adjustments. Industry federations in Germany and the Netherlands told Reuters they were advising members to diversify conference and training locations, citing growing unpredictability in United States mobility policies. Several European Union officials told the Financial Times that the United States had become, and I quote, less reliable as a travel partner, which was complicating academic partnerships, tech cooperation, and corporate mobility agreements. These shifts didn't take the form of public declarations. Instead, they appeared in quiet policy guidance, internal memos, and corporate decision chains that, together, redirected thousands of travelers away from the United States. Global institutions mapped the broader arc. The IMF's mobility update showed that global travel had surpassed pre-pandemic levels, with Asia exceeding its 2019 numbers and Europe reaching historical highs. The United States remained nearly 15% below its pre-pandemic inbound baseline, a divergence the IMF attributed to administrative friction, policy uncertainty, and traveler perception. The WTO's trade-related mobility indicators reinforced the same picture, showing that the recovery in cross-border movement was concentrated in regions offering predictable entry and stable political environments. The airline industry responded quickly. Carriers told Bloomberg they were shifting future capacity investment away from U.S. routes and toward Europe and Asia, where demand was more consistent. International hotel groups told the Wall Street Journal that convention bookings in American cities were weakening as organizations opted for destinations with fewer entry hurdles. Even cross-border e-commerce data tracked by the New York Times showed a decline in shipments between the United States and key markets like Canada and Germany, suggesting that hesitation about the U.S. was bleeding into consumer behavior. Economic consequences intensified as data accumulated. The U.S. Travel Association confirmed that America's long-standing travel trade surplus, a crucial counterweight to the goods trade deficit, had inverted into a deficit approaching $70 billion. Economists interviewed by the Financial Times warned that a sustained travel deficit could reduce the U.S. economy's resilience during periods of dollar strength, amplify pressure on current accounts, and reduce the country's ability to absorb external shocks. Meanwhile, sentiment abroad was shifting in ways that statistics alone couldn't capture. Travelers described smoother experiences in alternative destinations. Corporations found greater logistical efficiency in hubs outside the United States. Students compared visa timelines and chose faster, clearer pathways. Governments updated advisories that shaped public perception for years. None of these movements were dramatic on their own, but together they signaled a redirection of global mobility away from the United States and toward a multipolar network of travel, study, and business routes. The most consequential element wasn't the immediate decline, but the formation of new habits. Once travelers grow accustomed to bypassing the United States, their preferences adjust. Once corporations shift annual conferences abroad, those rotations tend to persist. Once families choose alternative education pathways, subsequent students follow those routes. Once governments encode caution into advisories, they rarely reverse quickly. Behavior that begins with temporary frustration often settles into long-term patterns. The world wasn't isolating the United States through confrontation or coordinated policy. It was discovering, quietly and steadily, that it no longer needed to orient itself around American entry points, American hubs, or American political rhythms. And if that discovery becomes permanently embedded in how people travel, study, do business, and move capital, the question will not be why allies pulled away, but whether they ever feel the need to return. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.